Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with reference recordings. And today we're talking about Haydn's Paris Symphonies. Now, we've already done a talk about complete Haydn symphony cycles. There can be duplication in reference recordings because there you're dealing with a 30-disc box set and you have one subset of choices. Here you're dealing with symphonies numbers 82 through 87. And it's a different subset of choices. There are many, many more versions. And so there's a different selection of reference recordings if you're just interested in that package. So you see, reference recordings are determined as much by packaging, presentation, marketing, what our listening habits are, as the fact that we really don't do them one work at a time. Depends on what the work is, of course. Some of them we do. So I just want to make the point. There will be overlap. There's also going to be some duplication. Sometimes the reference recordings are my however choices for the repertoire in question. But there, we're dealing with sort of the reverse. I mean, if you were to accuse me of saying, well, you're just repeating the fact that that's your favorite one. Well, quite often, as you have seen, the reference recordings are not my favorites. That's number one. But number two, where they are, one of the reasons I first came to listen to them was because they were the reference recordings. And I was looking for a version of the works in question, and somebody or somehow I read reviews or got recommendations, and they said, well, the reference recording is this is the one you got to hear. And so some of those I heard, and yes, they are the reference recordings, and I happen to love them. So there you are. So with respect to the Haydn Paris Symphonies, the reference recording is Leonard Bernstein with the New York Philharmonic. And this is a generally recognized reference recording. Again, I don't think this is a controversial choice at all. There were later versions of the Paris Symphonies, and there have been very good ones, really good ones. I mean, who's done good the Harnoncourt set on period instruments is fabulous. Actually, a bunch of them are. Thomas Fye is fabulous. The old Kurt Zanderling is splendid. Oh my goodness, there are just so many of them. Karajan did a fabulous job with the Paris Symphonies. It came as a big shock to everybody, I think. And so, and on and on and on. Really, they've been very lucky on disc, much luckier than the London Symphonies. And the reason, I think, well, there are a couple of reasons. But the first and foremost, the London Symphonies, there's more of them. There's 12. There's 2 sets. So it's twice your chances that some will be good and some won't be. They cover a much wider range than the Paris Symphonies in terms of their stylistics and Haydn's continuing evolution as a symphonist. So it's harder to encompass all 12, just like it's hard to encompass all the Beethoven symphonies or all the Mahler symphonies or all the Bruckner symphonies without having some weak links. But the Paris Symphonies, they tend to work really well as a clump, as a cohesive unit. And I think the reason for that is that, well, they're special in many ways. It's that when Haydn came to write the Paris Symphonies, these are the first, and I really mean it, the first symphonies that were written for public concert performance on commission for an audience that the composer didn't know. It's really, you think about that for a minute. Nowadays people write a symphony and you expect people to play it all over the world, or orchestras pick it up and do it. But in Haydn's case, he was writing up till that point symphonies. His symphonies were designed almost exclusively for the Prince Esterhazy, for the Esterhazy household and his local ensemble. And when he came to write the Paris Symphonies, he was writing for a group of musicians he did not know, in a place where he was very popular. I mean, his music had oozed out over the decades, and he was probably the most popular living composer. That's why he got the commission in the first place. But it was a totally different circumstance that he was kind of unfamiliar with. And so he wrote a group of 6 symphonies that he thought would meet specific conditions, those specific conditions, where he would not be available, for adjustments and to diddle things and observe what people were doing. They are, in that sense, abstract exemplars of what the symphony ought to be, of the Haydn symphony at its highest and best form. And they work really, really well as a bunch. They really do. I mean, if a conductor gets one of them, he's probably going to get most of them, if not all of them. And so they've been quite successful on disc. Now, Bernstein, this is what's really kind of interesting. You know, Bernstein's set is a fairly early set. He recorded them between 1964 and 1968. Note that. Note, unlike today, where, oh, you do 6 Haydn symphonies, Jim, you record them in 15 minutes in one recording session. He spent 4 years at it. And that was interesting because it was a better way of operating. These were not released in a box as a group. They were released individually over time, as albums of, I think, 2 symphonies on an album, 3 albums, something like that. And so you had a chance to let the market absorb what you were doing, to take note of it. You could determine whether you wanted to continue or whether you didn't want to continue based on sales. There's a lot of virtue in doing things slowly and deliberately over time. And this is one of those sets. But beyond that, Bernstein's feeling for Haydn, I think, is surprising for many people, or will come as a surprise for many people, because you know, he was the Mahler guy. I mean, he was a romantic, and he was a composer, and he did West Side Story, and he, you know, all of those things sort of militated against his natural feeling for Haydn. But he had a very good feeling for Beethoven, and so, you know, when Beethoven didn't come from nowhere, that's one thing. But the other thing is that what Bernstein understood was the theatrics of sonata form. It's something I talk about all the time, about how a lot of today's younger conductors just don't get sonata form. And so when they deal with classical repertoire, they're absolutely at sea, determining where the climax is, the energy that these pieces need, the feeling of tension and resolution, phrasing over large paragraphs, all of those things. Bernstein got it. He really, really got it. And because he got it, he got Haydn, who invented that kind of music. You know, the sonata style is a theatrical style. It's all about conflict and resolution. You know, it's about finding your way home. These pieces have internal plot lines that you can really sink your teeth into if you understand where the music's going and how it's shaped. And so Bernstein's feeling for Haydn was really very, very potent, and it was evident in all of the recordings that he made. I mean, not all of them are fabulous. His London symphonies, for example, are more of a mixed bag than his Paris symphonies. But boy, did he get Haydn. And part of it's just natural affinity. A lot of conductors don't get Haydn. They really don't. So there you are. And this set of Paris symphonies has been, you know, pretty much universally acclaimed ever since it was completed. It became the reference set. Also, in the mid-1960s, there weren't so many others. And the differences between Bernstein's recording and Saint-Anselme's is another one. He did a respectable set of Haydn symphonies. They were good for the period, I would say. But if you play those next to these, you see that there's an entirely different level of commitment and conviction and almost modernity, relevance in the style of playing and interpretation that Bernstein brought to the music, and that's what made these the reference. Partly it was a lack of attention given to these works when Bernstein really lavished his love and attention on them. Partly it's the nature of the music itself, the way it responds to a really vigorous, modern, big orchestra interpretation. Because remember, the orchestra that Haydn was writing for was very, very large. It was huge. I mean, 40 violins, Mozart told us when he wrote his Paris symphonies. That may have meant 40 strings in general, but okay, and all the woodwinds doubled. So you're talking about orchestras of 50, 60 people, and, routinely. So these are big orchestra works that work well with a big orchestra romantic interpretation, and that's exactly what they get here. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks so much for joining me, and take care.